Hi there and welcome to the Protectorate. Today we're going to talk about and have a full-on review of the RetroN 5. So the RetroN 5 is a multiple system compatibility console that allows you to play old games using your actual physical cartridges onto one complete system. On this review we're going to talk about both pros and cons, as there are some really nice things about this system and also some pretty negative ones too. But at the end of the day I'll give you my final results and opinions. Now this version that you see here is a special edition in the Hyper Beach color palette, which I personally love to bits. It's very retro feeling, but there are other possible colors, white and black or full black if you prefer. So what kind of systems can you play on this console? Well, you've got access to the NES, Super NES, Genesis, Mega Drive, which is the same thing but European, Famicom, Super Famicom, so the Japanese version of the NES and Super NES, and Game Boy Advance games. A great thing about this console is that it's HDMI based, in the sense that you can connect it very easily to a modern TV. So of course for some purists out there who prefer the actual feel of making the old consoles work, this might feel like a little bit of a way around something they find fun anyways. But for the majority of people, me included, having everything condensed into one console so I don't have to have literally 6 systems all connected really helps, and this is why the RetroN 5 is constantly connected onto my TV. Now I myself do have old systems, but managing to connect an old system to a modern TV, so basically the systems that are either SCART based, RGB or composite, can be an hassle. Of course it can be done, but then you need to do it for every single system. To be honest, just having the ability to connect them through HDMI, just one cable, one port, and you can play all the games you want from these systems. For me, it's a huge time saver and it's great. Now you might ask, but it's using an HDMI cable, but these games weren't in HD, so how does that work? Well, it does upscale your games all the way up to 1080p, so you'll be able to play old games, but in an upscaled format, and they look great. With a little caveat to that, in the sense that, yeah, they look great, but they do get a little pixely, and also if you have a very large TV, like in my case. But the system does come with some possible filters, so you can add scan lines. Of course, they are artificially made, but they still work. So if you are a lover of that kind of idea that you will get with old TVs, so the actual scans that sort of complete the picture, if you will, when it comes to old school games, then you can simulate that, and it does a great job at doing that. Also, the picture is quite sharp and the colors are great. And of course, one of the advantages that you get is the ability to create save states. That's similar to the Switch, which also uses emulation, but basically you don't have to worry about saving in-game, because sometimes in old games either you didn't have the ability to save, or you needed to find a specific location, like in the old Final Fantasy. You don't have to worry about that, you can save whenever you want. Now when it comes to its compatibility, I tried all sorts of cartridges. I used NES games, SNES games, Japanese games, Sega Mega Drive, Sega Genesis, everything works. Only one game didn't work, but then again, after blowing in it, probably I shouldn't have done it, and eventually it did work. So maybe it was just a problem with the game. At the end of the day, these are old games, so I can't really blame it on the system. But so far I've had no problems whatsoever, and this is why I highly suggest this one over this sort of machine instead, which is renowned for having, particularly in the first batch, for having some problems with reading the actual cartridges. This always reads the cartridges, no problem, at least in my experience. Now let's go to a sort of tutorial when it comes to how to use it, because some people have complained about the fact that you might need a bit too much strength to attach the cartridges and then remove them when you pull out the cartridge, and people are afraid, is this gonna break my cartridges? And the thing is that I think people who are making this complaint are not doing it right. So let me show you how you do it. The whole problem comes from the fact that the pins connector is actually quite tight on the machine. Maybe tighter than some people are comfortable with. But then again, you also need to consider the fact that original cartridges were supposed to be used hundreds of times and constantly changed. So these are pretty robust. So the whole idea is you shouldn't try and remove it vertically. You use the left hand to hold the console in place, as it's quite light, and with your right hand you pull from the right and then remove the left side. You do this, you'll never have a problem with removing cartridges. Instead, if you try to just pull it directly vertically from the center of the cartridge, then yes, it's gonna take too much strength too much force, don't do that. And in the same way, when you're trying to put the cartridge in, start from the left and then connect the right. No problems. So really the only problem with this system is the frigging controller. It comes with two controllers in this case. One is wired and it looks basically exactly like the Super Nintendo controller. This one works very well, it's high quality, it's an excellent controller. But then you have a wireless option. I wish they didn't include this, as Metal Jesus Rocks said. I totally agree with him, and Kelsey, I think, is the girl that works with him, and this controller is horrible. Now, for Metal Jesus, it stopped working after a year. For Kelsey, I remember her saying that it would disconnect. For me, it just never worked. I tried to connect it, it would connect, but then it just wouldn't work. It would be like it's constantly pushing right, or then it's constantly pushing down. Then I removed it, disconnected, it would blink. It just wouldn't work. It never really worked for me. It's just a really cheap, pretty bad controller. Since we're talking about controllers, there is some good news, and that is that the console can use any original controller from all the systems that it's supposed to emulate. You can use a Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis original controller and it has its own port. You can use an original NES, you can use an original Super NES, and funny enough, you can cross-play with them. Like, you could literally play a Sega Genesis or a NES game using an SNES controller, or if you're completely mad, you can do the other way around and you can play a Super Nintendo game using a Genesis controller. Good luck with that, because you won't have enough buttons. One thing it's important to understand is that RetroN 5, even though it uses physical cartridges, it still is emulation. And the way it works is that the moment you connect a cartridge through one of the slots, the correct one, be very careful, what the system does is that it creates a copy of the original ROM into the console, and then it plays that, it reads that. So it is a form of emulation, but anytime you remove the cartridge, the ROM is deleted. Now, the way I understand it, it was their way to avoid being accused of piracy. I'm not saying that emulation is piracy necessarily. I'm not saying that emulation is a problem. I love emulation. I think it's great for preserving old games, which are a work of art, absolutely. And, you know, these, even though I collect a lot of physical, these could deteriorate over time. For the price tag, I think this is a great investment, particularly if you enjoy, like me, using your physical copies and your physical games, but you don't really want to go through the entire hassle, which for some people is fun, I understand that, of having to struggle to connect 8 or 7 or 6 different systems that weren't meant to be used on a TV like this, and having to worry about how to do that and how to do cable management, and maybe you don't have enough space on where to place all these systems, or maybe you don't even have the consoles, but you do have a few games and you want to play them out of nostalgia. Then the RetroN 5 is absolutely a must-buy. And that is my final review. RetroN 5 gets an 8.5 out of 10. It's a fantastic console. I think it's great for what it offers. And if you are half the enthusiast I am when it comes to retro games, absolutely get it.